leading many to believe that the bull market is back, baby. But this was a big week. Tons of news, both from a regulatory, legislative perspective. Carolyn Ellison going to get 2 years in jail. CZ coming out. We have a lot to unpack today on the Friday Five. Good thing I have NLW here to cover it all. Let's go.
Let's go.
What is up, everybody? I'm Scott Melker, also known as the Wolf of Wall Street. Before we get started, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. As you guys probably know, we were in the path of the hurricane. Luckily, things not too bad. Lost a trampoline to the neighbors that was supposed to be tied down. A few trees down in the neighborhood. Definitely no power, but luckily my generator at least powers this room and my internet, so my kids can go scream in the other room where it's really hot. With all the neighborhood kids who have showed up at our house because we have coffee in a refrigerator. So the adults and kids are all here. You don't want to hear about any of that. You want to hear about the news. You also had a little hurricane action going on, right?
I was flying through Atlanta last night. I was supposed to be on a late night flight and was able to move it up about 12 hours to avoid, because the way that this is one of those, like, everything gets canceled and then people are sitting there for 3 days kind of a thing. So luckily I got
for
back.
Sure. And then they canceled schools here for 2 days, and then the storm didn't hit till like 10 o'clock at night. And we were just sitting here all day yesterday with the kids playing in the street. Like, why aren't they at school? Yeah, but I get it. So we got a lot to talk about here, obviously. Just sort of honorable mentions before we dig into the big stories. Pretty big moves here from Bitcoin. It's above 65,000, huge options expiry today. But a lot of people who are looking at the market technically have been watching sort of this 65,000 area to hopefully break. And I think the bigger story alongside this is that altcoins are actually moving, right? So I think there's some new money in the market. It's not just Bitcoin. And it looks like we could close a very good September, which wasn't supposed to happen, I guess, in the eyes of those who trade on seasonality. Leading a lot to believe that October and November could even be bigger than usual.
Yeah, although, I mean, just by rational things, if September is usually bad and was good, then October, like, it doesn't necessarily mean that.
Come on, man.
No, listen,
we do have history. We do have history, though, of when September is October decent, of having even better Octobers. But you are
right. No, October is we don't call it October for nothing. And I think that, like, some of this stuff this has been, I think, one of the singular strangest periods in crypto market history. Not bad necessarily, but just really weird in the sense that we raced up to new all-time highs without any sort of real meaningful conviction or excitement. You know, it was largely on the back of the ETF narrative. There's been no sort of new influx of money, except insofar as whatever's come in with the ETF. There's been a quiet sort of trepidation behind the scenes that things really aren't that good. There's the depression of sort of, regulatory, whatever. And then there's no sort of like new exciting thing, like, whatever. People enjoy meme coins, but I don't think anyone's trying to posit it as the future of finance in the way that there's always been a future of finance sort of narrative before. And so in that sort of context where people are sticking in there, like, we are now, like, the diehards are here forever, right? It's important to have things that just jostle us, even if they're not going to pour, new people in. And I think an outperforming September is exactly the type of thing that sort of shakes off the cobwebs, makes us remember that, like, we've been all gloomy at 60,000, and kind of gets everyone fired up again a little bit.
I totally agree with that. And, I've been cautiously optimistic, obviously, about October and November, but it always worries me when that's consensus. But I think it's important to remember that that's just consensus among a very small echo chamber of people who understand crypto, and the rest of the world still really not paying that much attention. So I think that we could be fine.
There's also consensus desire and consensus intellect, and it's important to always know which one. October is always at least a little bit of both.
Yeah, it's definitely both. But I would say that fundamentally we see primarily tailwinds, so things should be decent, but you never know. One of those tailwinds, obviously, this is the first official story here. Chinese stimulus, obviously. We got a ton of articles here, but Chinese Politburo supercharges stimulus with housing rates. Chinese biggest stock buying frenzy in years overwhelms exchanging. I mean, they went nuts with this stimulus on the market. And big stimulus week aims to draw a line under China's slowdown. And of course, finally, China weighs 142 billion capital injection into top banks. I mean, from what I read, they're literally at the point where they're just like sending hedge funds money to go buy stuff.
Yeah,
And
they're
this
doing
is the serious stimulus.
It's everything all over the place. So they changed fractional reserve requirements to inject more liquidity. They're doing direct injections to add more liquidity. They're actually, I think, considering direct payouts, which is something that 2 years ago Xi Jinping was talking about, how he's nervous about the spirit of welfare and how they don't do that. I mean, this is a definitely an about face caused by 2.5, 3 years of really failing economy. And also, outside of this would be the first year, that was be just the third year basically since the late 80s that China doesn't meet its GDP targets, with the other ones being 2020, which was COVID, and 2022, which was the resurgence of COVID lockdowns in China. So this would be the first non-COVID year since the late 80s that China looks like it's not going to meet GDP growth targets. And obviously that has them freaked out a little bit. So, I think that the story is sort of two parts here. One is obviously China and that policy, and being the second biggest economy in the world. Obviously, there's, has had huge ramifications around the world as well. But it's also now we are really, like, all central banks are pointing aggressively in the same direction. The Fed is sort of part of this story as well, with like finally sort of shifting into the hiking, or sorry, the cutting cycle period. And now it's sort of, we've leveled it up again. So I think that, this, if we go back to sort of that honorable mention story, to the extent that we're looking for an actual meaningful catalyst, other than just, we're shaking the cobwebs off and we like fall, liquidity being injected into the system does tend to produce, tend to drive Bitcoin, performance. In fact, Lynn Alden commissioned Sam Callahan to do a study about this recently that I just think they just put it out this week, where they found that something like Bitcoin moves with the direction of global liquidity, something like 80% of the time, right? So it's like when liquidity conditions improve, Bitcoin does well, which is, totally makes sense. But it's, there's some good numbers around it from Lynn and Sam, if anyone wants to go see those.
I'm going to jump ahead and then circle back on some of the other stories we have, because we talked about catalysts and what those might be. And that's sort of been a narrative this entire time. When are we going to get something that's going to, send us flying? I think obviously Chinese stimulus is a huge story. A 50 bip rate hike instead of 25. Also a huge story. We can debate another day whether that means something's broken or this is actually a bullish signal based on the past. But we have some others that are definitely worth talking about. SEC greenlights listing and trading options for BlackRock spot Bitcoin ETF. BlackRock Bitcoin ETF options to set stage for GameStop, like Gamma Squeeze rally, Bitwise predicts. And then I want to wrap into that sort of another of the honorable mention stories, which is BNY plans crypto ETF custody as Wall Street eyes digital asset revenue. For those who missed it, BNY Mellon, who is the largest custodian of assets on this planet Earth, has gotten effectively they don't have to follow SAB 121, right? They've gotten an exception. They're going to be able to custody crypto assets. So there's a lot to unpack here. So first of all, options being allowed on BlackRock's ETF is huge for people who want the ability to hedge or complex strategies. It's going to bring a ton more liquidity into the market. This was a natural evolution, I think, of the Bitcoin spot ETFs being approved. But the second story that I want to ask you about when I look at both of these is it's just BlackRock that's been approved so far. Last I checked, they're not the only spot ETF. And only BNY Mellon has gotten an exception to SAB 121. Last I checked, that's not Custodia Bank or any crypto natives who have been trying to do this. It feels like in both of these cases, the SEC is choosing incumbents that they're comfortable with and choosing winners.
Yeah, well, 100%, because it's just as Gensler gets more boxed in on how he can screw us up, he's going to find new ways to screw. The man could have 1 inch and he'd find a way to make that, put a tack down in it for us. So listen, there's sort of a good thing and a bad thing about this. The good thing about this is that these are obvious parts of the ecosystem that need to be there. They've needed to be there for a long time. It's all part of sort of the broader financialization of Bitcoin and the broader integration with the regular financial system of Bitcoin. It's a clear, steady path. There is an inexorable momentum forward for Bitcoin and crypto in this way. And to some extent, this reflects the fact that even Gensler and his antipathy can't fight that momentum. Now, what he can do is, on the way, keep his thumb on the scale and do things in the name of whatever he wants to say, right? It's like he's the last little bit of control that he can exercise, right? Is choosing who gets to do these things. And I think it's less about, in my guess, is that to the extent that there's a pernicious piece of this, it's less about picking winners than it is about picking losers and making it harder for certain actors. Like, I don't think that he cares about BlackRock versus Fidelity necessarily. I think that he cares about not Caitlin Long and not, like that. That's sort of the thing that seems to be here. The SAB 121 thing, we heard this in the congressional hearings this week, which may be jumping ahead a little bit as well. But, it was very clear that Congress, or many members of Congress, felt that in the wake of the SAB 121 debacle inside Congress, where it was sort of, both parts of the House voted to basically, nullify this rule. Biden vetoed it, of course. They still believe that with all of that, the SEC should have voluntarily withdrawn that rule, right? They shouldn't have made it be an issue that Biden had to veto in that way, or at least they shouldn't have responded to that. They should have listened to the will of Congress, in other words. And there was a lot of anger about that thrown at Gensler. This is an example of sort of him trying to carve a way to say that he's listening to that, by kind of creating these indulgences and sort of these exemptions, while not actually doing the thing that Congress thought, which is just get out of the way.
Yeah, it just feels wrong to me, although in the end it's bullish. Yeah, this is just yet again one of those things where it's like you cheer for things that might make number go up and institutionalization, but if you are actually deeply believe in the ethos of this asset class, it should definitely have alarm bells ringing in your head the way that it's happening.
My optimistic take about this is that I think that when it comes to the back,
I'm getting a glitch, but I don't know if it's on my side or NLW's. Can you hear me? Hello, we see him. I'm still moving. It must be his internet, not mine this time. All right. Well, we'll try to bring
crypto native institutional financial institutions. I think that the crypto natives were always going to have to.
Yikes. All right. Well, this is we're frozen here. You guys can hear me fine? Give me some comments if you can hear me fine. Okay, you're back, I think. You were frozen there for a while. Yeah, okay. I don't know if that was my side or yours, but mine's working. All right, go ahead.
What I was saying is that I think that there was always like it sucks basically that there's even more uphill battles for the crypto native institutions, but I think it was always going to be a challenge where at the beginning the products offered by crypto native institutions are going to have to rally the home base of crypto natives to build their support and slowly win back customers from the traditional institutions over time. And so I think even though that, BlackRock gets a head start, even though, BNY gets a head start, I don't think that counts out the crypto native institutions as players in the long term for this. So there's limits to how much the SEC can put their thumb on the scale.
Speaking of the SEC, Gary Gensler took a beating. That's what happens sometimes in Congress. We know that obviously every time he shows up, the Republican members like Tom Emmer take their opportunity to throw flames in his direction. Your inconsistencies on this issue have set this country back. We could not have had a more historically destructive or lawless chairman of the SEC. But interestingly, this time, especially in the case of Debtbox, if you remember, where some SEC lawyers actually had to step down, they basically perjured themselves in court. It was a pretty ugly offering in that case. I mean, everybody showed up. This was the full panel of SEC commissioners were present in this House hearing for the first time since 2019, which made it a lot more awkward for Gensler because Peirce and Ueda were able to basically publicly throw him under the bus rather than just writing letters and think pieces, right? So they were there. Gensler was under heat from both sides of the aisle. I mean, I don't think anything comes of it, but you gotta love it, right?
Nothing comes of it, but I think that to the extent that there was one thing that really stood out to me, it was Ueda's testimony. This guy does not come off as some crypto firebrand. This is a career SEC guy. He's been there since I think 2003, 2004. He's been through something like 6 chairs. And when he expressed his frustration, it's so sincere from the standpoint of just a public servant who wants to really believes in the mission of this institution and feels like they're way off. And I think that to your point, it's very cathartic for us to see Tom Emmer rip Gary Gensler is 18th asshole, but
what's new?
It's much more impactful, I think, especially for Democrats, and Republicans who are undecided about this issue or who've just been intentionally willfully ignoring it because it's so flamethrowery, to see this guy who just seems so like normal, basically being like, listen, we're off. We gotta recalibrate here.
Yeah, he said that he was frustrated that the SEC had slipped from being the quote gold standard in administrative rulemaking. I mean, listen, in this industry, we all obviously have this spite for the SEC, particularly Gary Gensler, that's grown over the past few years. But there was a time when the SEC was a highly respected and regarded institution that made positive rules and that literally nobody even thought about. Right?
Yeah.
Maybe go back to like the 9/11 days and stuff, and people were very positive on the SEC. So that does give us hope that maybe if things switch and we get rid of Gensler and the Purses and Yetas are in power, that things could shift in the right direction. And speaking of shifting in the right direction, whether you want to believe it or not, Harris vows to aid AI crypto sectors in pitch to NYC donors. Says she'll encourage crypto business while protecting consumers at Wall Street fundraiser. Protecting consumers sounds very SEC-ish. Is this a real pivot or is this lip service?
I mean, trying to actually understand that will send you into paroxysms of trying to figure things out. I don't think it matters. I think what's clear is that it's a signal that, look, Harris had one of two paths that she could go. She could either go like consolidate the left and, sort of like go the Warren route, or she could run towards the middle. You can totally not believe it. It's a very reasonable position to be skeptical of it, but she is clearly charting the middle path when it comes to business. That is like from a narrative perspective, that's what she's trying to sell the country on. The fact that she's spending as much time with sort of Wall Street as she is, at this late stage of the campaign is an indicator, right? Again, doesn't mean you have to buy it, but it's clear that she has decided and that campaign has decided that when it comes to the economy and the broader set of issues that, relate to innovation as well, that being in the middle is better than being farther on the left. So listen, this has been for a very long time a situation where, the right was never going to even begin to give this campaign a chance. The folks on the left have just been desperately looking for any sign that they don't have to choose between their principles and their jobs. And people in the middle, I don't think are probably all that undecided, but maybe this gives them slightly more ability to just kind of not factor this in to the extent that they don't want to factor it in as a decision point.
Yeah, the deeply crypto native tinfoil hatters pointed out the fact that she was very clear to say digital assets and blockchain and never really said crypto or Bitcoin, which led them to believe that this will be an inevitable push towards a central bank digital currency, which would be a quote unquote digital asset, all kinds of other things. It's all a possible take, but I come with your more reasonable down the road, which is say what you need to say ahead of an election to, alienate less voters and start to move in the right direction. I'm actually surprised that she's mentioning this at all. Yeah, my gut, for the last month was Trump won this round. She has no reason to really even talk about it. So, I mean, at least it should be a positive that it's on the docket on both sides.
100%. And I agree. My base case was no mention of this as well, as it's just a non-issue for them. I'll break the conspiracies here, like 100%. Like even in a Democratic administration that is pro crypto, it's still going to have to run the gauntlet of more centrally controlled versions of it and digital assets and blockchains and plugging into the existing infrastructure. That's just going to be the way that it goes. I think that the question is less whether that's going to happen and more where they end up on the other side, but there will be absolutely more interest in things like central bank digital currencies. If sort of a left progressive take on digital assets and crypto gets into power, doesn't mean that it ends there though.
Sort of a little honorable mention to this story was that after she said this, Stand With Crypto basically said she's in support of crypto now, and they gave her rating, and crypto Twitter freaked out, so they put her back to NA. It's like this major pushback. They were like, "Come on, yeah."
Yeah, in most cases, I think that our frenetic like insanity around this has gotten a little overboard. I think in this case the pushback was warranted. This was not you go from nothing to support. This is the first mention. It was a half of a sentence alongside AI. It's hardly like we can say support. So I think that they did the right thing to peel it back. They got I think they got a little overexcited.
Yeah, and sort of a story that I have not tracked so closely, but people are very passionate about. U.S. Foreign Affairs Committee passes resolution demanding Binance exec Tigran Gambaryan's release in Nigeria. This guy's basically in bad health. I think he's been captive since February, and effectively just for the actions of Binance. And there's no clarity on why he was actually singled out or targeted. And now we finally have the United States making a comment that this guy needs to be released. I think there was some fear about relations with Nigeria as I dig into the story, but this guy's still sitting there. I don't know if he's in prison but it's crazy.
It's not the U.S. making a statement. It's former U.S. officials. This one's real simple to explain. U.S. citizen gets kidnapped theoretically for the actions of his company. Like, you send in the fucking State Department to take care of it. I don't care what the industry is. I don't care what the context is. I think the people who are incensed about this, who I count myself among, it's as simple as what it means to be a U.S. citizen in the world. This is a deeply disturbing state of affairs, and it's inconsistent, and you can point to other circumstances in which the U.S. has been much more proactive as compared to this, but this dude has just been languishing in Nigerian prison, which turns out is not a Michelin star accommodation. So
yeah, I don't want to dig too deeply into it, but it always sort of anecdotally just shocked me that when obviously the war in Israel started, there were American citizens that were taken hostage, and we just kind of never heard about it. Yeah, I remember a time when if there were American citizens hostage anywhere in the world, that would be the only story on our media for months to come until it was resolved. Do you remember the guy getting caned in Singapore?
Yes, and not that long ago either. I mean, just to use one kind of media version of this, if you go back and watch The West Wing, which is again about a left administration. This is only 15 years ago that the show was, one of the most popular on TV. There's every season there was a hostage situation where the Democrat president wanted to send in the entire Air Force to take them. It's a very weird shift that has happened. I think this is why it's notable to people and why it comes up more and more, that it seems to be a bunch of different times, but listen, it's way beyond the scope of this show. But I think one of the things that we sometimes don't discuss enough, as there's been a rise in isolationism and sort of, turning back inward and, all for understandable reasons, is part of what you lose when America withdraws from a global leadership position in the way that we have is the ability to go throw around our weight and get people out of prison when they get kidnapped. And so unfortunately, I think this is part of a consequence of a broader American withdrawal from, leadership role. But like I said, way beyond the scope of this show.
Yeah, it must have been 1994 or 1995. I just remember being like a senior in high school, and that guy Michael Fay was going to get caned or lashed 6 times in Singapore, and it was like a foreign relations disaster that was a main story. You're talking about a kid who was just going to get hit with a stick. It's really wild, I think, what it's become. But as you said, we don't need to talk about that. We can talk about other people who are going to be in captivity as our final honorable mention here. Caroline, sentenced to 24 months in prison for FTX fraud, told to pay $11 billion. I freaked out about that one until my friend met a lawman said they can say any number they want. Doesn't mean she has it. And I think that's important because holy crap, if she had $11 billion, there would be some serious question marks, I would say. And then in just in the spirit of this, CZ apparently going to end up being released today, a couple days early. So some big figures in the crypto industry going in and out of jail. But I think definitely worth talking about this 24-month sentence. Apparently she was the rat snitch of all rat snitches of all time, according to the judge. Nobody has ever cooperated more than Carolyn Ellison to bury her ex-boyfriend SBF. But is 2 years enough?
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, look, we have the sort of perspective, is 2 years enough from where we're sitting. But if you put it in the context of sort of white collar crime more broadly, I think that this follows the pattern that we've seen, which is it's quite clear that basically everyone involved in the prosecution of this case wanted it to be a signal, I don't think just to crypto, but to white collar crime in general, that prison is one of the things that happens when you commit this type of crime. That hasn't historically been the case, right? There's lots of, fines and fees and things like that, but prison wasn't that normal, right, for white collar crime. So the fact that even the collaborator, who sort of was integral to the prosecution's case, getting 2 years is not nothing. I mean, the judge spent about a half an hour talking about how Carolyn was Sam's number one victim, only to end with, but that still doesn't mean a get out of jail free card, literally. And now you're going to jail. So I don't know. I think totally reasonable to ask whether it was long enough or whether it should have been longer. But in the context of sort of what I think people might have imagined 10 years ago, especially if this wasn't in crypto, it was just sort of normal Wall Street stuff. I don't think they would have anticipated a 2-year sentence. Yeah.
Well, maybe she can have a freak off with 1,000 bottles of baby oil
God.
in the Brooklyn prison with SBF and Diddy, and maybe they'll throw Eric Adams in there with him.
Goodness gracious. What the heck?
I don't even know how to finish after that. That's all we got for you guys today. On the Friday Five. We will see you guys next week. Of course, follow the breakdown NLW. He does a great job of this every single day. Go get some sleep, man. I know you had the red eye. Talk to you soon. Guys, see you on Monday. Bye. Thanks.
That's dope.